Hello, this is me, Mark Chance. And what I'm doing here is I'm re-recording a talk that I gave at the Cathedral of Our Lady of Walsingham on Sunday, April 7th. The reason I'm recording this to begin with is that there were a number of people who told my wife they wanted to attend but could not attend, and then asked that we record it. And so I recorded during the talk, and the sound quality was just horrible. My recording software is far from like top of the line. So here I go again. Those of you who may have been at the talk Sunday and who might be bored enough to watch this video to hear the talk a second time, it's not going to be the exact same talk. I worked from an outline, not a prepared manuscript that I would read, verbatim. So here we go. This is a conspiracy of women. Very good. So I was born on October 3rd, 1967 at Port Hueneme, California. This is Port Hueneme, California here in the picture. Not as it currently looks, I'm sure. When I was born at Port Hueneme, it had been open 4 years. Port Hueneme is the Naval Surface Warfare Center. And my father, Mark Robinson, was stationed here in the Navy at the time that I was born. I did not live in California long, however. Shortly after I was born in California, Mom and my father and we moved to New Britain, Connecticut, which is where my sister Sarah was born, around about the time I was 4 years old. So there. And so this is my mother and father. My father's obviously the one with the mustache, and my mother is the lovely lady sitting next to him. I have no idea when this picture was taken. Not a clue. I'm guessing he wasn't in the Navy when this picture was taken, because his hair is longer and he is sporting something of a mustache. In contrast to a later picture that we'll see. So this is me as a baby. As you can tell, I was, well, not was, I mean, I still am, but as a baby, I was quite adorable. So there's that. And I was playful, and I occasionally caught colds, but even at Christmas time when ill, I was still pretty adorable. So there's that. And anyways, back to my father. This is Mark Lewis Robinson. I was named after him. My name is obviously not Mark Lewis Robinson anymore. It's Mark Chance. I was later adopted and took my stepfather's name. We'll get to him later. But right now, the topic is this guy. But before that, I need to just briefly address the idea of the domestic church. The domestic comes from the Latin word domus, which means home. So this isn't like a home church, right? Like some kind of underground, we're living in North Korea kind of thing. Not that kind of domestic church. Instead, domestic church is a term that refers to the religious environment within a home, and the tone of that religious environment as it is set by the parents especially. And the domestic church in the home affects the way children grow up to view the church, properly speaking. And so this is where I'm starting at here with this idea of the domestic church. So what was my domestic church like as a child? So these would have been my earliest years, up to and including kindergarten. So my father, from things that I'm reasonably confident I remember, is he's partially the source of my almost pathological fear of needles. I do have memories of him sticking me with pins. I have no idea why he would do this. I mean, there's no reason why you would stick a child with a pin. So I guess there's that. But those memories are somewhat vague. More specific in my mind are the memories related to domestic violence. One of my clearest memories as a child, and I would have been about 4 to 5 years old at this time because my sister was born. I remember my sister sitting in her high chair, and it was dinner time, and for whatever reason, an argument started between my mother and father that ended in fisticuffs, basically. And while my mother attempted to defend herself against my father, who was larger and stronger than she was, I was the one that had to run next door to the neighbors to get them to call the police so that somebody could show up who could get my parents to stop hitting each other. So, there's that. I also have a memory of him later on kicking the front door down to get into the house where we were at. Not sure if it was the same house where the incident of domestic violence took place, well, for this vivid memory of this one. I'm sure there were other instances, but there was this one that I definitely remember. So it would seem, no, it would seem, my father, he's got problems, and from what I've been told, those problems have continued throughout his adult life, possibly even down to today. I don't know. I haven't seen him since I was probably around 8 years old, seen or heard from him, and all the time. And I'm 51 now, so 40 some odd years, right? So quite a while. Anyways, we continue. So my domestic church starts off pretty bad, but at the same time, there are these, frankly, horrible memories of him. Not all of the memories are bad. This is, of course, Kung Fu Grip G.I. Joe, as you could tell by his Kung Fu grippy hands. And I had G.I. Joes when I was a kid. And one of them one time, and I don't remember exactly how this happened, but one of them one time got a board, a 2x4 or something like that, fell on him and crushed his torso. Because while the Kung Fu grip hands are made out of flexible, grippy rubber that would eventually dry, and all of his fingers except for his thumbs would snap off, and then he was like Hitchhiker G.I. Joe instead of Kung Fu Grip G.I. Joe. The chest was made of hard plastic, and it shattered underneath the weight and the impact of this 2x4. My father, the same father who beat my mother, who insulted me, I remember him once telling me that I had no friends, and would quite likely stick me with needles. He took the G.I. Joe and all of the broken pieces of the torso and meticulously glued them back together. Restored the action figure to the best of the ability that he could, and I to this day remember the cracks and the glue lines all over Joe's torso. So there was that, and he was also the same man that played this game with me, Cascade. The little tower over to the side, the marbles would go up the tower. I'm guessing there was some sort of crank device. I'm not sure exactly how that would work. But when the marble got up to the top, it would go down the slide, and then it would bounce off those drums and land in the box-like thing at the far end of the track, so to speak. And depending on which slot it landed in, you would get a certain number of points. And I distinctly remember my father lying on the floor with me And I was playing with this toy, and I still remember the boom, boom, boom sound that those metal marbles made as they bounced off of those drums. Uh, so my image of a father at an early age was a violent and cruel man who, at the same time, was capable of demonstrating love and concern for his children, or for at least me. My sister doesn't not figure very prominently into any memories with him. Um, uh, so this is mom. This is a strange picture. I think. I think it's fairly obvious she knew she was being photographed since she's facing right towards the camera. But what an enigmatic facial expression this is. She's probably in high school at this point in time. This is certainly before she's married. This is a somewhat old picture of mom. You can also tell how much we look alike in this, and she's also, I mean, my sister's, I mean, dead on in some cases. Pictures of my sister as a elementary school children. The few pictures I've seen of my mother at that age, you couldn't tell the difference between them, except for mom's pictures are in black and white. Anyways, moving right along. After we left El Paso, well, no, excuse me, after we left New Britain, Connecticut, we ended up in El Paso, Texas, which is where my mother is originally from. She has family there. My uncle, her brother, still lives in El Paso. Her mom lived there at the time. And we lived in a trailer park in the middle of the desert. And I can honestly tell my children that I walked through the desert to get to school, and it was uphill in both directions because there was a walking overpass that went over the highway. So uphill in both directions across the desert. If it ever snowed, it would have been through the snow, I'm sure. So in this trailer park in the desert, I had a kickball, and I did what you're supposed to do with kickballs. I kicked it. And when I kicked it, it went over the fence into a neighboring property. There was a unimproved road, dirt road basically, that ran through the middle of this property, and there were trailers on either side. And so I would play in the road in between where the trailers were. Kicked the ball, it went over a fence, and the ball was attacked by a fearsome, to my 5, 6-year-old, 7-year-old mind, a fearsome dog, and was popped, right? And my ball was slain. And whatever the virtues are of super glue, you can't super glue a popped kickball back together. That just won't work. And my father wasn't around for this anyway. So what my mother did is while I was inconsolable and terrified, she walked across the street, opened up the gate, and walked into this fearsome dog's yard. She shushed the fearsome dog when it barked at her, and knocked on the door to that trailer and read to the woman who lived there the riot act about how dare she have an animal that would pop a young boy's ball. And I'm reasonably certain that my mother got the, I don't know, 20 cents or whatever it would cost to replace the ball back then out of the lady. And I'm still in awe of my mother because of this, the fearlessness that she showed in defense of her son's popped kickball. Just astonishing. Now that said, mom wasn't she wasn't perfect. She had a drug abuse problem. My father probably did too, but I don't really remember that because, well, I just don't remember. But I do remember my mother. I remember the marijuana. I remember the LSD, where she would have LSD parties with her girlfriends, and that's when you would shut up all of the windows and shut off all the lights in the trailer, wrap a coat hanger with plastic, such as the plastic from a dry cleaner's, and then hang it from the ceiling with a pan of water underneath it, and then you'd light the plastic, and it would melt and drip and flare and sizzle. in the darkness. And apparently, when your senses have been altered by LSD, this is quite the experience. I don't know. I've never done LSD or smoked marijuana for that matter. I didn't even drink until I was in my early 20s, except when I was in Washington, D.C., where the drinking age was 18. It's strange that I was a compulsive rules follower in that regard, considering some things that will show up later on. So my image of a father is arbitrary and violent, if not cruel. My image of a mother is courageous, but flawed, but intent on retreating from reality. Here's mom again, and then that's my sister next to her. I have no idea where this picture was taken. Not a clue, not a clue. But it's a nice picture. I like it. Hi, Sarah. That's my sister, Sarah. And then this is my mom. This is obviously a more recent picture. This was not too long before my mother died from cancer, unfortunately. And I'm proud to say that she died well. That courage, the same courage that she had trading blows with my father and facing down that kickball killing dog. She had that courage in those last minutes of her life as well. And I'm happy for that, at least. And it's moving right along. So this is my mom in the background. That's me in the foreground. You can see my ear and my sideburn. The main focus in this picture, however, is not my sideburn. It's not mom, even though she's in the center of the picture. It's the guy with the cutting board and the knife. That's Jimmy. That's my stepfather. That is who mom remarried. In my vocabulary growing up, and even down to this day, the name Jimmy is synonymous with father. You know, I don't think I've ever called him dad. I don't know if I ever will. It sounds weird even saying it to myself on a video screen like this, but Jimmy means the same thing. So there's that. After we'd lived in El Paso for a little while, we moved to Houston, and my mother loaded up a big truck, and she drove everything we owned, along with me and my sister, across Texas to Houston. She had friends here in Houston. We moved into a small duplex. It's really probably the only kind of duplex there is. I don't know, but it was a small duplex. Not too far from, well, actually not too far from where I live now. And Jimmy was a friend of those friends that my mother had, and he helped us move in. Helped us, because I mean, you know, first, I don't know, second, third grade maybe. My sister even younger. So, you know, I wasn't carrying in furniture at that age. And he and my mom hit it off. My mom had other boyfriends. I vaguely remember some of them. But Jimmy was the one that took. Jimmy was the one that kept, so to speak. And then not too long after that, we moved into a somewhat larger duplex, and he moved in as well. And my mother remarried at Bear Creek Park. And I don't remember what year it was. And the pastor then, if I remember right, his name was Wiley of Clay Road Baptist Church, which will show up later on in this presentation, officiated at the wedding as well. I remember the outdoor wedding. I also remember the mosquitoes. Yeah, I don't know about these outdoor weddings in Houston with the mosquitoes. Anyways, this is Jimmy. Interestingly enough, I don't know if I want to read too much into this. Jimmy had also been in the Navy, like my father. Unlike my father, Jimmy has those tragic 1960s Vietnam War era Navy glasses. They're horrible, just horrible. He is a Vietnam veteran. He has never talked much about what he did in the war. He has almost seemed ashamed of it. for much of the time that I've known him, which I think is a shame. His shame is a shame. Most of the soldiers and sailors and Marines and airmen and whatnot that served in Vietnam served honorably. And to a very large extent, our cause was just, as the so-called re-education camps that were set up and were responsible for the deaths of thousands and thousands of Vietnamese show, after we abandoned our South Vietnamese allies in the 70s, and the North Vietnamese took over the entire country. Anyways, enough history. Back to the history. So back to the history. So there's Jimmy. Now Jimmy's family lived in Arkansas at the time, and this is the Buffalo River in Arkansas. That's not us in the canoe. This is stock photo, right? Stock photo. And I remember we went to Arkansas to meet my new grandparents. I now have a grandmother and a grandfather, which is something I didn't really have. I had a grandmother in El Paso, and I knew my father's father, John Robinson, but after the divorce and we moved away, there was little to eventually no contact at all with him for years. I was in the Army by the time there was any contact with him again. The reason the Buffalo River figures into this is it starts to show what kind of man Jimmy was. I'm in elementary school at this time, certainly. So 4th grade, 5th grade at the oldest. And we're on the Buffalo River, and I'm wearing my life preserver. And I asked if I could go out wading in the river, because this is cool. I didn't think I'd ever been in a river before, at least not that I remember before this. And so they said, sure, go splash in the water. And I splashed out too far and got caught by the current, and was in my mind at the time being whisked downstream, and surely I was going to die. So I cried out for help, and the way I remember it in my mind to this day, without a moment's hesitation, Jimmy charged into the river and dived in, like a lifeguard in Baywatch or something like that, even though Baywatch wasn't a thing back then, right? And pulled me out of that river and gave me back to my mother. He was a man of action. He was a hero at that point in time. What a sharp contrast to a father who would tell me I'm friendless and stick me with needles and punch my mother, right? This is most certainly an improvement. Something to be cherished. And in the 70s, those of you who are old enough to know, truckers were quite the thing in the 70s. CB radios were very cool, 10-4 Good Buddy and Breaker Breaker and all that kind of stuff. And I got to visit my first truck stop with Jimmy. And while we were at the truck stop, there was another man along with us whose name I do not remember. And we ordered lunch, dinner, whatever it was, at the truck stop. So this is cool. I'm at a truck stop. I'm eating truck stop food, right? Convoy, all that kind of good stuff. And along with my meal, there was a small little bowl that had what appeared to be some sort of cream soup in it. Cream of mushroom, I don't know. So I got my spoon and I took a couple of bites, and it was tasty, so I ate more of it. And the man that was with us, with Jimmy and me, said something to the effect of, "That's gravy, you don't eat it with a spoon," and probably called me stupid or something to that effect. And Jimmy, again, without hesitation, told him I could eat my expletive-deleted gravy however I wanted to. So not only would he save me from a certain death in a river in Arkansas, he would defend me to others, right? That made, obviously, I mean, here I am, 51 years old, and this has made a lasting impression in my mind. Now, lest it sound all rosy, as if my skewed impressions of what parents ought to be like are going to change. Not really. We'll get to that as in just well. Let's do that now, and I'll hold off on this picture. That's obviously me, the one kneeling. I'm not the one in the wheelchair. So Jimmy, at this time, the reason we were at this truck stop, I believe it was in Texarkana, is because Jimmy was basically a low-level drug dealer at this time. He sold marijuana. To make a little extra money, and I was on my first and as far as I remember was my last interstate drug run. Jimmy had a van, and the inside panels on the walls of the van could be removed, and then those panels could be packed with plastic and tape wrapped bricks of marijuana, and then the wood, the paneling put back into place. And we drove this, I believe, to southern Missouri. Not exactly sure where, but I believe it was southern Missouri. The man who went along with us was, like I said, I don't remember his name. I doubt seriously he was one of Jimmy's friends. He was probably sent along by the guy that gave the marijuana to Jimmy to make sure everything got where it was supposed to go. I don't remember too much about the trip. But I remember those things clearly. I also remember Jimmy taking me to meetings with this mid-level dealer, the supplier, so to speak, who would parcel out the merchandise and let people know when monies were due, and things like that. I remember Jimmy once explaining to me that he wasn't really worried about going to jail. Because if he ever got arrested for this, it wasn't really him that they were after. It was the people higher up on the chain, so to speak. And I just accepted all of this at face value. I had, for as long as I could remember as a child, adults smoking marijuana, LSD, things like. I mean, this had always been a part of my childhood. So why should it change just because my mother had a new husband? It doesn't seem like it should change. So brave, man of action, would defend me, but also sold drugs on the side. Wasn't his main job. I don't know if that makes things better. He had a job. Worked for Hughes Tools, Weatherford DMC, things like that. So anyways, now we're moving up into middle school. Now, I'm not in middle school in this picture. I'm actually in the military at the point in time this picture is taken. But I met the guy in the wheelchair. That's Fred. I met him in middle school in the 6th grade. I remember not liking him when I first saw him because it was in PE class. And he was sitting in his PE clothes up in the bleachers watching the rest of us be forced to exercise. And he was just sitting up there grinning. And I remember thinking, that's not nice. He should be down here with the rest of us. Why does he get to sit out? Why are we being punished and he's not? It wasn't until later on when he and I became friends, and I'm not exactly sure when that happened, but sometime in middle school, certainly. Fred was a hemophiliac, and PE was a required class, but he couldn't participate. If he were to participate and get hit too hard, that was most certainly a hospital trip, if not worse. And back then, Fred and I, we would ride our bicycles, we would climb trees, and so on and so forth. But over the years, he was about a year older than me. Over the years, just the repeated damage to his joints, especially his elbows and his knees, just took their toll on his body, and it got to the point where he couldn't walk for extended periods of time anymore. So the wheelchair. You also might notice he has a tracheotomy scar there. The suppressed immune system that came along with some of the side effects that went along with the hemophilia. Fred, shortly before this picture was taken, probably about a year before this picture was taken, now that I think about it, because they lived in a different house at the time, if I remember right, had psoriasis so bad that it covered his body from the top of his head down to his feet and almost killed him. and they had to do the tracheotomy so that he could breathe. So there's that. But Fred was my best man at my wedding. He was the brother that I never had. And that's Fred and his wife. Fred looking, this is a tragic picture for Fred. Barbara's lovely. Fred looks deranged, honestly. Sorry, Fred. Anyways, and then this is Mom too. This is Fred's mom. Her name was Ruth, but I just called her Mom. And I spent as much time, if not more time, at their house than I did at my own. It seemed like the older I got, the more that was true. It was a way for me to get away from well, yeah, I mean, part of that was just being a teenager, right? You're sick of your parents. But then there was also, getting away from the drugs and some of the dysfunction that went along with that. Now that said, there was dysfunction in Fred's family as well, but it was a different kind of dysfunction. It was a dysfunction that I was more inclined to tolerate, I guess. Anyways, both Fred and Ruth are dead now. They died a number of years ago. Fred from an aneurysm, and his mother had a lot of health problems. And I remember going into the hospital. She was in the hospital at the time that Fred died. And I went into the hospital and I told her that Fred had died. And that's the first and so far the only time in my life I have literally seen somebody lose the will to live. And then after that, there was nothing the doctors could do. So anyways, I guess enough of that. Moving right along. So far, my domestic church hasn't included a lot of church. That changes in late elementary, middle school. My parents, Jimmy and Mom, we become members of Clay Road Baptist Church. It is at Clay Road, which isn't far from where I live now. At Clay Road Baptist Church, I'm baptized after my public profession of faith. I'm, I don't know, 11, 12, maybe 13 years old. I could get up and go look for the Bible that has the date in the front of it, but it just doesn't seem like worth the effort right now. I have fond memories of Clay Road Baptist Church. It was a nice place. The people there were earnest in their faith. They supported each other. It was a loving community of people genuinely concerned with doing what they perceived to be the will of God and making the world a better place, at least for their children and the members of the church and whatnot. But at the same time, my parents still use drugs. A little bit of conflict there, I think. And part of what comes along with this, for me at least, and I'm not saying this is true of all Baptists or whatever. This is me. This is my story. Clay Road Baptist Church was part of the Southern Baptist Convention, and it probably still is, I don't know. And it was very much emphasized that once one was saved, one was always saved, that there was nothing one could do that would remove one from the grace of God. So after my public profession of faith and my baptism, I was officially a saved Christian. At that point in time, no sin I could ever commit would make me anything other than a saved Christian. And in my mind, at least, this was not really a motivation to be grateful and to amend my life and try to live in a way that honors God and my family. Instead, it was like a permanent get out of jail free card. So yeah. And as I went into high school, I had this clear idea in my mind that authority didn't matter if I didn't get caught, and morality didn't matter even if I did get caught, if you couldn't punish me. So, for example, I distinctly remember the last time my mother hit me. I don't remember what I said or did, but she tried to slap me, and I caught her hand before she could hit me. And I don't know who it terrified more, her or me. I'm certain that at that moment, when she was looking up at me, because I was taller than her by then, she didn't see me, she saw my father looking back at her. And everything that went along with that, the abuse that she had suffered at his hands. That I know. I mean, she never told me that, and I never asked, but I could see it. It was there in her face. Sorry, Mom. But this isn't a good basis for morality. That if I can get away with it, it doesn't matter. If you can't punish me, it doesn't matter, because once saved, only saved. So the only consequences that really matter are ultimate consequences. And because I was a publicly professed baptized Christian, there would be no ultimate consequences for me other than heaven. Now, I went to Spring Branch Senior High School. I was part of the last graduating class of 1985. I was more or less smack dab in the middle of that class in terms of rankings, probably a little bit in the bottom 50% rather than the top 50%. I was a pretty horrible student, especially my last 2 years there. After I had signed the delayed entry paperwork for the Army, I knew very clearly which classes I had to pass in order to graduate, and those are the only ones that matter. So, there you go. It's not like high school is today, where you get like credits and star and end of course exams and all that kind of stuff. That didn't exist in 1985. Now, one thing that did exist in 1985 is my lovely wife, Katrina. Now, she wasn't my lovely wife then. This is Katrina with her hairdo, like some sort of World War II era bomber girl, whole Betty Grable kind of thing going on there. Katrina claims that we went to the same junior high. I have no memory of her in junior high. I'll take her word for it. And we really were not friends for most of high school. It wasn't really until that last year of high school. And we sat near each other in English class. And Katrina was the one that couldn't get away with anything, so that when I would subtly disrupt class in order to get somebody sitting close by like Katrina to laugh, she would be the one that would get shushed. So yeah, there's that. A little bit of a troublemaker, I guess I was. And anyways, so I'm going into the Army, and as the school year went on, it was no secret I was going into the Army. And I asked Katrina on a whim, maybe almost as if doing her a favor, hey, if you'd like, you can write me while I'm in the military. And she did. Not many people I went to high school with ever wrote me, out of all of the ones that said they would. She's one of a bare handful. Count on one hand, and I'd have a few fingers left over, right? Now, we weren't dating or anything like that. I'm sure that at some level she was deeply smitten with me, because, who wouldn't be, right? Anyway, so then I'm off into the Army. So here I am in the Army. That's me with Mom too, with Fred's mom. This is somewhere in between, I'm guessing AIT at Fort Ben Harrison and my first permanent duty station at Fort Bragg. But that's just a guess. I'm not 100% certain about that. So there I am, man in uniform. And here I am again, man in uniform. And here I am again, man in uniform. This was my PLDC class at Fort Bragg. Where am I? Oh, there I am, right in the middle. That's me right there. Yeah, guy with the beret. I was part of the Strategic Dissemination Company for Psychological Operations Group Airborne. So there we go. I actually wasn't a paratrooper, though. I'm wearing the beret because it was an airborne unit, and that was the required uniform. But I myself was not a paratrooper. So just, make that clear. So after Fort Bragg, I end up stationed at Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. Sorry, lost my train of thought. And in between here, in between high school, where my idea of authority and morality is definitely skewed, and going into the military with that kind of attitude doesn't work real well. You either figure out that that things like honor do matter, or you probably aren't going to have a very good time in the military. And I did start to figure these things out. I, for the first time in my life, started to become aware that there's a distinction between power and authority. And what I had always thought is that the two were basically the same thing, right? And so this is why early on in the military, here I am 17, 18, 19 years old, and I'm reading Nietzsche, and I'm thinking, this guy's got a few good points. This makes sense. This seems like a good way to look at things. And then the longer I stayed in the military, the more it became obvious that no, that doesn't really fly. And in the military, I encountered my first creed. Southern Baptists don't do creeds. The military does. The military has the Soldier's Creed, which was first enunciated by President Eisenhower in August of 1955, if memory serves. I'm going to look at my notes real quick. Memory serves. The first part of the Soldier's Creed reads, and I'm going to read this off my paper, I am an American fighting man. I serve in the forces which guard my country and our way of life. I am prepared to give my life in their defense. That's very unambiguous. And in the military, I came to understand that if I'm going to do this job well, if I'm going to be a soldier, I need to take this seriously. And so I'm sliding away from Nietzsche during this time, thankfully, sliding away from Nietzsche during this time. I'm not sliding any closer to really being a serious Christian or anything like that. I would go to church, when I was home on leave. That's about it. And I am coming aware, though, that I am an essentialist at heart. I didn't know what that meant at the time. I would figure that out later on in college, but I would have made a good Confucian, right? Essentialism is basically the idea that one's station in life, one's relationships in life, define one's moral duties. And so I am a soldier, therefore I have a moral duty to be a soldier. If I can't do that, if I can't live up to the soldier's code, then I need to get out of the military. It's not the place for me anymore. So there is this sense of integrity, I guess, that is growing. And I was in the Army for 8 years. And during this time, Katrina and I stayed in touch. I would see her when I was home on leave. She would go out with me and whomever I was dating at the time, and whatnot. And none of the women that I ever dated amounted to anything, ultimately. There were things about them, in some cases, that I deeply loved. A couple of them that I considered what life would be like if I were married to them. And ultimately, though they always fell short, there was always some flaw that outweighed whatever it was that I found attractive and meritorious about them. And it dawns on me about 6 years into the military that all of those things that I loved in these other women, not that there were many of them, mind you, I was not a Casanova, all of those things that I loved about them were all present in Katrina. She was, so to speak, the total package. And not that she's perfect, right? None of us are perfect. But Katrina's flaws were also things that endeared her to me, as well. And so I proposed, and she said yes. And I made the decision that military life wasn't the kind of life that I wanted for her. And she, I mean, I didn't make that decision all on my own. I mean, she agreed, for whatever reason. I mean, I don't think she has any experience with military life, so there's that. But it just, I don't know. I'd seen too many marriages ruined by the pressures of the military and whatnot. So I left the Army and I moved back home. And I wanted to go to Rice, but Rice wouldn't take me. I was a transfer student. I had finished my associate's degree in the military at my last duty station in Hawaii. And now, of course, I knew Katrina and her family were Catholic. And I thought, I was raised Baptist, and, Baptists talk about Catholics, and they let you into the truth about Catholics, that Catholics worship Mary, and they believe you have to work your way into heaven, and that, it doesn't matter what you do, all you have to do is say a Hail Mary or two, and God will always forgive all of your sins, which, as an aside, seems like a strange complaint from Baptists, given that whole once saved, always saved milieu that I grew up in. But that point aside, So despite my reservations about Catholics, I know those things didn't really apply to Katrina because I knew her and I knew her family, right? So other Catholics might worship Mary, but not these people, right? Not my Catholics. So Katrina and I are married. We have children. That obviously, these aren't baby pictures. This is my son and daughter, Christopher and Adrian. And we have two other children who did not survive to birth, Nicholas and Bethany, as well. So 4 children altogether. Back to Christopher and Adrian. They get to go to England for Christopher's graduation from high school, and I get to pay for it. Yeah. Anyways, this is my daughter, demonstrating how much we look alike. And this ends up where we have like a mustache montage at this point in time. That's my sister in yellow, sporting her mustache. Yeah, good times. We were having a Freddie Mercury party, and there. See, notice how much we look alike, right? You get rid of my sister's long blonde hair and stick a mustache on her, and it's like we're twins. Isn't that one? I'm taller, but we're twins. Oh, nope, went too far. Forget you saw that one. That one's later. Okay, so marriage, college. Now, in college, I went to the University of St. Thomas since I couldn't get into Rice. And my degree's in history, but I figured while I'm at University of St. Thomas, a Catholic university, I might as well study up on all this Catholic stuff. Because when I married Katrina, I promised Father Wayne Elkins of St. Catherine of Siena that I would raise our children Catholic. And that means I needed to know what that meant. So I have minors in Catholic theology and Catholic philosophy, as well as English literature, and stuff like that. So I studied a lot of Catholic thought when I was at this Catholic university. I would buy the books for theology and philosophy classes that I was not enrolled in so that I could at least read the books. Might not get course credit, but I'm studying up on this stuff. And little by little, I come to see that all of those Southern Baptist beliefs that had been drilled into my head about Catholics, that they're not true. Some of them are just based on misunderstandings, but others are the exact opposite of true, the exact opposite of true. And that was a bit of an eye-opener for me. My academic advisor, Father Schieffelin, was an expert on Cardinal Newman, who was a Catholic convert, who once observed words to the effect that to deeply study Christian history is to stop being Protestant. Now, it's obviously not true for everybody, but it did end up being at least partially true for me. It was not, however, primarily my study of Catholic history and philosophy and theology that led to my conversion. No, we're back again to the conspiracy of women. The conspiracy of women. Before I do that, I also do need to mention Father William Kelly, who taught in the theology department back then. I took Father Kelly's Gospel of John class, and when we get to the Bread of Life discourses in John's Gospel, and some of Jesus's disciples object to Jesus saying that if you want to go to heaven, you have to eat my body, you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And his disciples are like, ooh, that's crazy talk, we're out of here. Then they leave, and Jesus doesn't call them back. And Father Kelly asked the rhetorical question, if they misunderstood what Jesus meant, if Jesus did not literally mean eat my flesh and drink my blood, why didn't he call them back and explain himself? And it's a rhetorical question. It's not meant to have an answer. I came up with what I thought were good answers for it. And ultimately, the more I thought, the more I prayed, the more I studied, none of them were really good answers. The best answer is Jesus meant it. We must eat his flesh and drink his blood, and not metaphorically or symbolically or hypothetically, but really in a substantially mystical sense. But anyways, not going to try to get into the doctrine of the Eucharist in this video, because that's not what it's about. It's about me. So the conspiracy of women. Here are some. We've already met Katrina, right? Here's most of the rest of the women. Starting on the back row, on the right, that's my mother-in-law. Next to her are three of her sisters. That's Jane and Barbara and Sandra. And then, oh, I did it again. I just blanked on her name. I do this every single time, and now I feel horrible. Sue. Sorry, Sue. So there's them, and then that's would be my grandmother-in-law in the front as well. These women, along with my wife and along with my sisters-in-law, because I've got two of them, they were praying for me. They were conspiring behind my back. Conspiracy literally means to breathe as one, to breathe together, right? And that's what they were doing. They were all breathing as one about me, praying for my conversion. And when I was received into the church at the same Mass that my son and I received First Communion at the same Mass, at the same time, my mother-in-law, Joan, was standing behind me, holding my shoulders as my confirmation sponsor, and, holding them tight, too, like she was afraid I was going to run away. And by that point in time, it was just too late. Wasn't going to happen. And my understanding of authority has changed by this point in time. The Apostle Paul in Romans 1:5 refers to the obedience of faith. And the construction in Greek, because Paul wrote in Greek, not English, right? Wrote in Greek. The construction is the same as saying City of Houston. They are equated with each other. To be faithful is to be obedient. To be obedient is to be faithful. And this is the point in that time in my life where all these different strains of thought have come together. And me being the essentialist, I have come to realize that, at least by and large, everything the church teaches, I can accept as true. Intellectually, I can accept it as true, and morally, I can accept it as true. And that being the case, the only choice I really have at this point in time is to be Catholic, because if not, I'm living a lie, and I can't do that. I can't do that. At least not in the big things. Maybe the little things. Again, nobody's perfect. And there's one other woman who was involved in all of this, and that's Mary. Oddly enough, perhaps, from what I've read about other converts, especially converts coming from, say, a Baptist background, I never really had a huge problem with Marian doctrine. Once I understood the fundamental principle of Marian doctrine, which is the principle of analogy. Everything that the church teaches about Mary, the church only teaches because of something that is true about Jesus. So, for example, if God is my father and Jesus is his son, that means Jesus is my brother. And my brother's mother is my mother. So Mary is my mother. Right? If I say as a Christian, Mary's not my mother, I'm disowning Jesus somehow. It doesn't work. And then there's that whole pesky commandment about honoring mother and father, and Jesus did this perfectly. And he must still be doing it perfectly. And so if Jesus is going to honor and obey Mary, why do I think I don't have to honor her? Right? So once I got that, the Marian doctrines for me completed the family, because really what a lot of this talk has been about is about looking for a family, right? Looking for a father who is not arbitrary and cruel, looking for a father who doesn't break the law to make a little extra money on the side, having a mother who isn't trying to use drugs to escape from the painful memories of her past. These things I find somewhat imperfectly, because that they're transcendent realities, but I find these things in the church, in the Catholic Church. I have a mother in heaven, 3 mothers in heaven now, Mary, Ruth, and Mom, and I've got a father in heaven, and my brother's in heaven, and 2 of my children, I firmly believe with all my heart, are waiting for me in heaven. And this is, when I stop to think about it, a source of great comfort for me, that no matter how bad things get, I'm not alone. And I have a family that will not abandon me, no matter what. So anyways, that's my talk. And so I'm going to end it here. Eventually this will, well, I guess that's enough. I just need to stop rambling. Thank you very much for your time and your attention, and I hope you've enjoyed this.